Good evening, everyone, and welcome to another evening of Northshire Live. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Rachel Person. I'm the event manager for Northshire Bookstore in Saratoga Springs, New York. My colleague, Davith Wood, from our Manchester Center, Vermont store, thank you all so much for being here with us tonight. Before we get started, a couple of quick notes. First of all, you may notice as you come in that this meeting is being recorded for later broadcast on our YouTube channel. However, fear not. We have the settings arranged that the recording is only picking up those of us who are unmuted and speaking into the yellow box. So if you want to have your camera on, you may. You don't have to, but you may, and you will not be recorded. You will not show up on YouTube for posterity. In light of everything staying muted throughout the event, please do use the chat box at any point during the evening. Put in any questions there that you have. I will save them up and I will pose your questions for you at the end of the night. Please make liberal use of that chat with your questions. And then last of all, before I get started by introducing our special guest this evening, a word of thanks, all of you. It has been quite a year in the world of small businesses and independent bookselling in particular. It wasn't easy, but Northshire has limped along and has made it through the worst of it. And that is really thanks to all of you. We could not have survived this year without the incredible loyalty and support of our customers. And all of us at Northshire are deeply grateful for that support. So thank you for your once and future support of Northshire Bookstore. Now tonight, I am so very excited and proud to get to welcome Larry Kirwan to Northshire Live. He was the leader of the New York-based Irish political rock band Black 47 for 25 years, a band that had a huge influence on my 20s, I have to say. He's the author of 5 previous books, including Liverpool Fantasy, Rockin' the Bronx, and Green Suede Shoes, and 17 plays and musicals, including Paradise Square, which will open on Broadway in 2022. He hosts the Celtic Crush radio show on Sirius XM, and he's with us today to talk about his new novel, Rockaway Blue. Tonight, he will be interviewed by Matthew Fitzpatrick, whose novel Demon Tide will be published this fall. Please join me in welcoming them to Northshire Live, and I'll put links to both of their books.
All right, Rachel, thank you so much. It is a pleasure to be here. It's an honor and it is a blast. In all my years of doing radio, I've met some really interesting, accomplished people, but I really have not got the opportunity to sit down one-on-one with someone like you, really helped shape and define my 20s. I'm a rock fanatic and I would run around and see Black 47 any opportunity I could. And like you said, Larry, I mean, it's not, most people associate him with what I call the 4-7. Everyone approached, that's his main, what most people know him, but he's done a ton. He's a modern day Renaissance man. He's done plays. He writes for the Irish Echo. He's got the Sirius radio. It's amazing. So this is a blast. And actually, when I got, introduced to Fire of Freedom, the first major label release, and then followed up with Home of the Brave and Green Suede Shoes, and all just even the historical elements to the songs, they taught me much more than a tenured professor on campus. So it was a blast. Larry, welcome. Thank you so much. It is an honor to speak with you.
It's a pleasure, Matt, and it's good to be back in Saratoga. I had many's the good night up there with Bernie Mulligan there.
Well, I want to, my first question, I kind of want to really talk about why we're here tonight. Rockaway Blue, the new novel released by Cornell University Press. And it's exciting. I read it, I loved it, I embraced it. And the Rockaway Times gave you a recent write-up, I believe it was in March, and lauded how your portrayals kind of connected with Breezy Point and the community vibe. The Murphys, the protagonists, reminded me some of my own Irish American family growing up. I mean, they were lovable, funny, loyal, but flawed, and touched with some tragedy. So I guess kind of an open-ended question would be, so why Rockaway? Why the Murphys? And what was the driver to inspire you to write really such a wonderful novel?
Well, I'll begin with the Murphys. I wanted to catch a real Irish American family. And of course, I've known so many of them over here, not just in Rockaway and New York, but all over the country. And it always surprised me when I would go to different areas of the country, how the Irish diaspora had spread through the country and how each part of the country had left its print on the Irish people. So someone on the south side of Chicago is very different than someone on the south side of Boston. So I wanted to capture a family, but to draw from many different families. And I came up with the Murphys. There's the father, Jimmy, who's a detective sergeant in the NYPD, but he's been to Nam. He was sent off when he was 19. He was non-political, and he came back from Nam with a problem. And each of the members of the family has a secret or a problem. He came back and he married his high school sweetheart, Maggie, who has gone to Fordham and is on the intellectual side and becomes a Catholic school teacher in Rockaway. And she's very much into her books, and she's into Jimmy too, and into trying to help him. But Jimmy's not the kind of guy who wants to deal with his problems, as many men aren't. And they have 2 children, and the 2 children are very different also. One, the eldest, Brian, is from the get-go, is very intelligent, and he takes to his mother in a big way. She introduces him to poetry and to novels way ahead of his years. So he's a rising star right from the start. He gets a scholarship to Regis, which is the top Catholic or Jesuit high school in New York, and then he goes to Georgetown, graduates to the top of his class, and instead of writing his ticket to Wall Street or becoming a lawyer, he surprises everybody by becoming a cop. And after a couple of years, he starts to rise there too. So by the time he's 30, he has passed his father by. He's one of the youngest lieutenants in the force. And this causes problems between the 2 of them. Not just, Jimmy's not jealous of his kid or anything like that. It's just, he feels that the family is ahead of him, both his wife and his kid. And then the second kid is Kevin. And Kevin is the opposite of Jimmy, or the opposite of Brian. He's not an achiever. He's a musician, doesn't like to read, and gets in some trouble on the boardwalk, smoking pot and whatever, but eventually starts to settle down and becomes a member of the fire department. And they go along like every family. There are problems here and they're made up for. And then tragedy strikes. 9/11 comes. Brian is, as ever, at the center of things. And he rescues 7 people out of the North Tower. But then he runs back in. And of course, he was a great athlete too. He was a great football player. They tried to stop him.
Running back. Yeah.
Running back. So he gets right through and goes up the stairs, and then the building collapses on him. So nobody can believe it. Guys like Brian are supposed to get out, and the family is shattered. And this goes on for a couple of years. Maggie takes it worst of all and totally retreats into herself, leading to big pressure on the marriage too. And then about 2.5 years into it, Jimmy finds out that Brian was actually in the North Tower 30 minutes before the plane struck. What was he doing there? He immediately smells a cover-up. He goes to the suits, one of whom is a guy he grew up with. On his second visit, he's told, leave it alone. You don't want to know this. So it's national security, and you may get a different picture of Brian than you've already thought of. And so Jimmy's faced with the dilemma. Should he pursue this? In which case, his wife, Maggie, who's on the verge of getting better, may sink back into depression if she finds out something is not right about Brian. But he knows he can't do it and he has to press forward. So that's the Murphys.
That's
why I did it in Rockaway. Well, I wanted to get a quintessential Irish American place in New York, and yet not have it be of the city, have it be something that's very separate. And the Rockaway Peninsula is really interesting in that Rockaway Beach, which is in the center, is kind of middle class, lower middle class, has all types of people there. It was originally called the Irish Riviera.
That's the South Shore of Boston. They stole that, but go ahead.
Exactly. And then you've got Far Rockaway, which is more urban, but oddly enough is very Orthodox Jewish also. And then you have Breezy Point, which is a gated community up at the top of it. So you have a lot of different social strata on the whole peninsula. And I felt that was important to, if you want to capture New York and capture the essence of what happened with 9/11, because Rockaway had taken a fierce banging with it. So many people died out there, and it was a big cop fireman community, but also one of the groups that got really hit really big, and I knew because of Black 47, was the young professionals. They were called young financials in New York. They were usually the first in their generation to go to college, and in the firm Cantor Fitzgerald, which almost got wiped out in Berlin. A lot of them are Irish. And so that was the reason I chose that. But the personal reason came from Black 47, oddly enough. To do the book was because of the band, because we were so big in New York at the time, we could have a residency every Saturday night. We were in the city, and we had it in a place called Connolly's. So our feeling was we should get right back, start playing again, because at this point, New York was a ghost town at night, and especially Midtown. So our idea was we had to kind of put it out on the quiet, because we weren't friends with Giuliani at the time, and he was the kind of guy who could close you down if he wanted to, and that's the type he was. He just didn't become an asshole with Trump. He was that way right from the start with us, and we had many to run in with him politically and everything too. So we put out the word, and a lot of Black 47 people came, but the word really went down to the pit down on West Street, what was left of the World Trade Centers. And the first responders, they all came up. And we're there the first night, and we're all standing around waiting to go on. And I noticed something happening. Every time the door would open, everyone would look around, because we didn't know who was alive and who was dead. And someone would come in and say, Jimmy, you're alive, or Joan, you made it out. And that happened through the whole night. And by the end of the night, I was thinking, yeah, we saw all the Jimmys and the Joans, but the Bryans and the Marys who didn't make it, who would have been coming in to see us, gotta tell their story too. This can't be just a Giuliani story or a political story. Or you could already feel that the powers that be wanted to go to war in Iraq, wanted to use this. And what I was trying to do was to get the story of the regular people who had either escaped this or who hadn't escaped it, and to tell their story. So with Black 47, we did an album called New York Town, and it kind of captured it, but it didn't really. And some of the songs worked really well. And then I wrote a play, I'm a playwright, called A Heart Has a Mind of Its Own. And the play was well received, but on opening night, people were clapping and everything. I was thinking, no, man, I missed it. Jimmy was the main character in it, but I knew I hadn't got him. And if you don't get Jimmy, the play is not there. So I let it be because we got involved in the Iraq War and the protests against that. And around the Depression or the recession time, I started to do it in the form of a novel and worked on it for a couple of years, and then thought, it's almost there, but I just don't feel like going out and promoting this. Just seemed it was too early, and I would let it sit every year, and then
The novel, the way it got picked up, is a great anecdote. I'd love you to share that. How it got picked up is really fun.
every year I would, around 9/11, I would think, is it okay? Should I do the novel again, finish it off? But it was like, and then one year, I think it was 2017 or 2018, I remember getting up and I'd forgotten it was 9/11 that day. And when I realized that, I thought, let me think, could I do that? Could I go out and promote this book now? I thought, yeah, I could. And that year, that coming Sunday, I told the story of the book on Celtic Crush, my show on Sirius XM. And, I got a lot of letters about it, but I got one letter in particular from a guy called Dean Smith, who was a listener to the show and was the head of publishing at Cornell University Press. And he said, could I have a look at that? I said, yeah, sure. I can let people see it now. And he read it and said, let's do it. But you're going to have to update it a bit because I can tell that's you 10 years ago writing it. So I started to do it, and then he left. That happened. And the same thing had happened to me with Liverpool Fantasy. So I got 2 editors on it. But the second editor came in, Michael McCann. He worked a lot on it too, and we put it together. And then we were about to do it for October, but my agent said, no way. She said, every book that I put out 4 years ago in 2016 didn't sell in October because the politics just takes all the oxygen out of the air, and that's it. So you can't do it now. So we said, all right, well, when do we do it? And she said, you do it in March. And that was it. So it was just one of those books and stories that kind of strolled along in its own way.
Well, I mean, I think the background you gave is fascinating, and a lot of the themes you sort of touched on. I think it's kind of a cool time in the interview, but maybe we hear a little bit firsthand from the novel. I'd love to hear you share some of those words, your thoughts, with the participants. I'd love to hear it.
Sure. Well, what I'll do is I often start at the beginning, but figure this time I'll move forward into the book. One of the tricky things with this is there's a mystery in it, so you got to be really careful all the time. Anyway, Brian has a wife called Rose, and Rose is not thrilled with Brian at this point. She was the heartbroken wife and everything, but now she's a symbol, and she's the wife of one of the martyrs of this book, where she wants to get along and to get back into life. And Jimmy goes down to visit her, and while he's there, she gets a phone call from her lawyer, because nothing was simple with 9/11. It wasn't that you just got your settlement or anything, it just came in the mail. You had to kind of, put forward for different things. And eventually she has to get a lawyer to deal with the case for her. And then she finds out that Brian owed a lot of money on top of everything else, because he was always thinking, tomorrow is going to be my day. He was one of those kind of people, and left her with a lot of debt. So Jimmy doesn't want to get involved listening to her story or her argument with the lawyer. So he goes into Brian's study. And Jimmy is a bit of a reader himself, but he's more like Hemingway, Graham Greene. He goes into, he always liked Brian's study, but it hasn't changed a bit in the 2.5 years. And Brian was a heavy reader, especially about religion. And Jimmy goes in and he's always marveling at these books because they're not there just for show. Brian used to actually read them. And he knows the books kind of by heart where they are. And at the end of the religious ones, he sees a new book that he had never noticed before. And he picks it up and it's a Quran. And a card falls out of the Quran and he reads it. And it's from Jimmy's friend, Youssef, whom he knew because he was investigating the bombing of the World Trade Center in 1993. And Youssef was helping him. He knows that he brought Brian to Youssef's falafel parlor once, but the piece of poetry on the card is by Cavafy, the Egyptian poet, and he reads it, and it's pretty intimate and is a dedication to Brian on it. And he's thinking, Brian knew Youssef that well? And at that point, Rose comes down and he closes the book up. He doesn't want to upset her. She hasn't even noticed there's a Quran there. And as the story goes on, he realizes that he's getting deeper and deeper into Brian's life, but there's a lot of stuff just not making sense. So he goes to Youssef's falafel parlor to find out, what does Youssef know about this? And what he finds out just floors him. And it's not a comfortable meeting either for Youssef or for Jimmy. And Jimmy leaves and his world is turned upside down. And that's where we take it from. Excuse me, it's vodka. After his conversation with Youssef, Jimmy couldn't bear to get on the subway, much less head back to Rockaway. Nothing made sense. Brian might have had a roving eye, but he wasn't crazy. And yet, Youssef was no screwball. He wouldn't want to disturb Jimmy or his family. Jimmy turned on his heel and strode along Montague Street, past the dark certainty of St. Anne's Church, unsure of his destination, but heading towards the water. And everywhere he noted the stately beauty of Brooklyn Heights and how it appeared to be so balanced, while Jimmy's world was toppling this way and that. When he reached the promenade of Brooklyn Heights, he stared out across the East River at Manhattan. It was cooler up on the wooden planks as the sun broke through the clouds and began to descend on the cranes and docks of New Jersey. And Jimmy decided he'd walk across the bridge, clear his head, get rid of what Youssef had talked about. Already the rush hour cars and trucks were jammed both ways on the bridge. As he neared the middle, he could pick out the ferry plowing its way across the swell from Staten Island. And in the distance, the spires and domes of Ellis Island glowed in the fading sunlight. The setting sun was indeed working wonders, causing Manhattan's skyscrapers to turn into coppery shades and setting a myriad of windows afire. He'd never heard of Edward Hopper, until Brian gave him a poster of Nighthawks with its moody, nocturnal diner. After that, he couldn't get enough of the guy, for to Jimmy's eye, Hopper captured the unease of the city's silent soul. What would Hopper have made of the gaping hole on the west side? What shade of russet or brown would he have employed to depict the rattling void that refused to depart after so much else had been blown away? Ever since boyhood, Brian had his own agenda, but he always left clues, dropped hints, and enigmatic smiles so that you could piece things together. Jimmy could tell he was missing something. But no matter how much he racked his brains, he just couldn't identify it. A wave of weariness broke over him. Maybe he was washed up. He wondered if he should call it a day, surrender to the poison of that big scar in the ground over on West Street and let all memories and suspicions remain banked there. But he knew he couldn't. He knew he wouldn't. He had to persevere. And so he strode on as the watery sun lit up the sails and riggings of the lonely remains of Walt Whitman's schooners. And with each step, he became more in tune with the madness of Manhattan and the freedom it had always promised those who rejoiced at being different. Had Whitman's legacy suffered when the world came to the conclusion he was gay? Or had that knowledge only added to the luster of the Civil War nurse, the intrepid printer, and the first great taker of New York's pulse? Manhattan, it had always been open to those who had tiptoed across some imagined moral fault line. People like Brian, who strayed from the accepted path when pursuing a goal. I mean, did anyone love Beautiful Dreamer less because Stephen Foster abandoned his wife and drank away his despair into 5 Points? But Brian wasn't around anymore to lift the veil from suspicious eyes. He wasn't available to vindicate himself. If the word got out about Yosef's accusation, many would change their opinion of Brian. The hell with it, Jimmy swore. He would get to the bottom of what his son had been up to. With that vow taken, his mind cleared, and he hurried on to the end of the bridge and into the depths of lower Manhattan. Thanks.
Well, Larry, that is an extremely powerful passage, and I think it's extremely indicative of the book as a whole. It's a really strong book. I think anyone who hasn't gotten into it yet, they're going to get gripped and they're going to get shaken, they're going to get stirred. I think, just to reiterate, our guest tonight is Larry Kirwan, author of Rockaway Blue, his latest novel. And as you read that, I thought about Jimmy, the torment that he felt throughout the novel. And I don't want to give away too much. Only give away what you feel like pulling the veil from. I'll give it an example would be like a guitar string, right? You pluck one guitar string, you hear it, the others vibrate, but they don't make noise. The death of Brian was almost like a guitar string. He was the family member that actually perished during the tragedy, but it affected all the other, and it was like dropping a pebble in a pond, and family members, even members of the Muslim community, everyone was affected by this death in some way. And you know, you're from Ireland, but you are an unabashed New Yorker, and we all, you know, relate to you as a New Yorker. As you've gone through living there in the community, talking to the people, being an artist in the community, you've had to deal with pre 9/11 New York, post 9/11 New York, which you tackle in Rockaway Bay, Rockaway Blue. Have you seen a change in your author's voice over the years as your city has experienced these events? Even the COVID New York City, I know, was another wave of tragedy. Has it changed your either optimism or the way you bear witness to the city? I mean, Rockaway Blue, there's definitely um, a lot of tension and conflict within that family. Is that, did you create that or did the city do that to you and how you reflect yourself and your thoughts?
Well, I'd like to think that you get a little bit wiser as you go along. I mean, when I came to the city first, I came for adventure. I had seen Midnight Cowboy. I thought, man, I could handle a bit of that. And I went straight to 42nd Street. And then because I was into Bob Dylan and he had written Positively 4th Street, I headed down, looked for an apartment on 4th Street. I didn't find one there, but I found one on East 3rd. I had to go way across to the east side. And so I was living amongst, you know, a very bohemian crowd, but also very ethnic Latino and Latina crowd, and a lot of Puerto Ricans and Dominicans. They became my friends, and there were a lot of African Americans in the East Village at that point too. They've gone totally at this point. And I hung out in this bar called, it was an After Hours, and I became a member there, and I spent a lot of time with people from different backgrounds. And one rule in the bar was you could not show a weapon in there. You could not take, you could have a weapon on you, but you couldn't take it out. So it was a fairly dangerous place, but nobody ever took a weapon out because they would be barred instantly. It was the one rule. And the bartenders were transgender, and I learned all about that life. And, you know, it was just a total different lifestyle than in Ireland. And yet I had that background from Ireland to judge, not to judge, but to see what that life was about and compare it to all my lives. And as you're saying, there was the pre 9/11, the post 9/11, pre-pandemic. So all of it kind of gets into your psyche, and you're able to find a character like Jimmy. And to me, I've written a lot of characters because I'm a playwright too. Jimmy is one of my favorite characters. He just epitomizes a certain thing about New York, kind of like lonely guys who don't totally fit in. And they fit in their community, but after 3 or 4 drinks, when you're talking to them at the bar, you see who that person is. You get to see into their soul in a way that probably their families don't see. And so I think that's what you're talking about. And also being a playwright, I spend a lot of time building the character even before the story, you know. And it's one of the lessons I would suggest to every writer is that don't start to write the story first. Write the character. Just sit down. You don't need to write anything, but just let your mind go. I'm writing about Jimmy. What about him? Yeah. He went to Nam. What happened to him in Nam? Came back an odd guy. How long did it take him to get normal again? Did he ever become normal? Does he fit in Rockaway? He doesn't. He fits in kind of. He always retreats to it. So, you know, I spent a long, long time on Jimmy. And then The person I didn't spend enough time on at first was on his wife, Maggie. And that was one of the things that held up the book. I had her as a victim, and I don't know why I didn't see it, but as you know yourself, Matt, when you're writing, you tend to get tunnel vision sometime by it, and you get so much into one character, you miss out on another. And then with this book, had an extremely difficult thing to do too. You had to, if the person who's reading the book can't see Brian as a flesh and blood person, the book is not working. And yet you never see him that way. So you're building him by what people are saying about him, what they're feeling about him, but you're never going to see Brian. So everyone has to, for the book to succeed, has to find their Brian. So I think character to me is as important as story. Story will come eventually, one way or the other, but character, you got to work at it.
Well, you raise a really interesting point, because as a novelist myself, you're describing now some mechanics that you use, the process, and creating the character first, and the story will come. And I think that's fascinating. I think something I'm going to internalize after this interview even. And what would be fascinating to me, and maybe some of the participants on the call, would be whether it be with, Rockaway Blue, or with even just your other works. I mean, you've devoted your life to be an artist. You devoted your life to be a craft, whether it's your plays, whether it's Black 47, whether it's the novels. I mean, you are a consummate artist. I'm curious, maybe for selfish reasons, to know, was there anything early on, like that aha moment that you just said, I mean, I know for me, it was the night I got to hang out one-on-one with Dennis Lehane. That changed my life. What happened to you? Can you point to anything in particular that said, I'm going to be an artist. I'm not going to be a selfish Wall Street type. I'm going to express myself for a living. Hopefully not resigning yourself to a life of poverty and obscurity. No, but it's the road less traveled. Let's face it.
Well, where I came from in Wexford, you couldn't use the word artist. You couldn't say I'm an artist. And to this day, I wouldn't even say it. I think it's overblown sometimes. I think an artist should be deemed an artist by the people around them, rather than saying, I'm going to be an artist. So I didn't set out to be one. I did know that music was at the center of the world in the late 60s. And I could tell that if I came to New York, I always liked the New York sound. And, Brendan Behan had come to New York, Dylan lived in New York, Miles Davis. So it was like, I knew I could kind of fit in there. But you bring up another good point. I actually had to say to myself at one point, I am going to be poor the rest of my life. Are you prepared for that? You do have to make that choice at some point. And I had a small apartment on East 3rd Street in the heroin district, and with $175 a month. And I knew I could be an artist, or I didn't even use the term artist, but that I could do what I wanted to for the rest of my life, but I was going to be poor. And I resigned myself to that. And then Black 47 took off, and I didn't end up poor. But there are things if you're going to live that life, it's almost like becoming a Franciscan, and I had been a Franciscan altar boy. So I had been around that particular branch of Christianity that had devoted itself to being poor. So, I was cool with it, I didn't like going home to Ireland because I would always have to borrow the money to do it beforehand. And as I described in Rock in the Bronx, that novel that, was about the Bronx and about people going back for Christmas, you borrowed money. You went downtown, you bought a suit, and you looked great. and you came back and you figured out how much money you're going to spend so that you can actually, when you're getting on the plane at Shannon, you've spent everything. Now, when you got to Kennedy, you had to figure out how the hell do I get back into East 3rd Street? Yeah. If my brother is not there waiting for me, this is going to be tricky, but that's the way you did it. Huh? So,
You know, that, no, it's really cool that you speak to the lifestyle, because, and I know Rachel's going to take over in a few minutes. We're going to move to some Q&A. In the few minutes we do have left, and this has been fascinating. This is such a blast. I'm with Larry Kirwan. I'm talking the new novel, Rockaway Blue, and it is just so fun. I hope everybody picks it up, and it makes a great Father's Day gift. We got a few days to go. Fantastic Father's Day gift.
Definitely a good Father's Day gift.
Yeah. So
I wouldn't have thought of it when I was writing it. But
yeah, see, I mean, well, so, you know, just the last few minutes, one thing you mentioned, and because I can relate to this, I came from a career, I did a major career change. I was in finance and all that. So I became an author later in life than you decided to resign to be an artist, but I'll never looking back. So being a rock star, which you were literally, you're night after night very connected to your fans. It's sweat, it's, you know, your feelings, your voice, you're exhausted. And now as a novelist and a playwright, I can't speak about being a playwright, but being a novelist, it is a bit of a lonely, quiet existence. How has the change in your lifestyle affected you? Has it affected your views on things? Are you happy with it? Do you miss the accolades?
no, because I did it, you know.
Yeah. Very few people can say they did.
You know, Black 47 was such a unique band. We were very united in what we were doing. It's not that we sat down and talked about politics or whatever. In fact, most of what we did was we laughed. You know, we laughed from the minute we got in the van to the minute we got out of it. It was just like more like a boys' club than anything else. So we did have women in to sing and play with us too. But you know, it was just a real honor to be able to be a political band and to say, you know, we're totally for civil rights in the north of Ireland. We're totally against the Iraq war because our people are over there fighting it, and they're all going to come back and they're not going to have jobs, and a lot of people are going to be messed up from it. And you sent them over there, Bush. You sent them over there, Clinton. You know, we were sticking up for our people, and we felt that, you know, and we were a lightning rod around that time because, you know, the war has changed now, but in the first 3 years of the war, everybody was for it. You know, George Bush had 80% ratings at the time. And we were saying, no, you are wrong. You have caused another Yugoslavia here. And this is going to end up badly for the US, and it's going to end up badly for everyone who worked for you over there. You're going to leave them behind, just like you left the people in Vietnam. And now the same thing is happening in Afghanistan. The people who helped the US are going to get betrayed and are going to get killed over there. And it's, you know, we saw all that type of thing happening, and we said, no, you're wrong. You know, and it allowed a lot of other people who couldn't do that because they were getting fired from their jobs if they were doing it. You know, you wouldn't believe how many letters I got saying, thank you for doing this. I'm totally behind what you do. If I do it, I'll get fired, and then my wife and children won't be able to eat. It was that kind of thing. And so it was a real privilege and an honor to be in a band like Black 47. But then you do it for 25 years, and
that's a lot of late night shows.
Yeah, and it wasn't there was a burnout thing, but it's like, you know, at some point you have to kind of stop and say, you know, are there other things I want to do? And you know, one night in Buffalo, we were on stage, and the band was smoking, and everything was going so great, and it struck me, this is the time to finish up. And of course, we didn't. I talked to the band and we decided to play for another 15 months and just go back and play for everyone who had ever booked us and go back and say goodbye to everyone. But 25 years was a long time, and I'd always loved playwriting, but there was a lot of times I couldn't go off and do a workshop on a weekend because my main responsibility was the band. If I didn't play, the band wouldn't be able to play. So I had to sacrifice things like the playwriting and the novel writing. So it was good. And it took a little while, but I don't know. I'm one of those people who is pretty adaptable, I guess. You know, I don't, you know, you're on to the next thing. And I've been lucky in life that you move from one thing to the next. And
Well, I mean,
yeah.
you've certainly been able to adapt to several mediums, all artistically driven, all creative, all engaging. And, you know, it's all, I think, is basically culminates with Rockaway Blue. I mean, it's an amazing novel. I hope everyone buys it, and I hope it becomes a New York Times #1 bestseller. I would be so excited for you. And there's no reason why I shouldn't, because it is fascinating. I got my copy here, and it's even beat up a little bit because I've been reading it so much. All right.
That's
So,
what we like.
Larry, this was a privilege and honor, a once in a lifetime opportunity for me. I've been a fan for so long. You got me through some really great times and some rough times with your work. So I'm going to turn it over to Rachel. I know there's people who have questions. This has been a privilege. Larry, I wish you so much success with everything you do. And the next project, I will eagerly await the news.
Thanks so much, Matt. And thanks for everything you're doing for this.
You got it.
So audience, you can type any questions that you have into the chat. And I actually have one to kick things off. Larry, you talked earlier about how your playwriting influences your novel writing, the need to develop characters. One of the things I always admire about you as a songwriter is your real narrative structure to your songs. And I wondered if your songwriting also played a factor in your sort of developing your work as a novelist.
Yeah, they all kind of feed into each other. But what happened with the songwriting was really interesting because I was in a new wave band before Black 47. It was, you know, I fancied myself as the next David Bowie. I had a green lightning streak in my hair, and then we got dropped by the record company, and I was left thinking, should I form a new band or whatever? But I'd wanted to become a playwright. And I said, no, I'm going to do the playwriting. This is the shot. And I wrote, directed, produced, did everything for 4 years and did, I think, a play every year. So I got totally into it. And then I met Chris Byrne from we formed Black 47. And we took over the gigs that he was supposed to do with his band that was breaking up. So from the night we formed the band, the following Friday night, we were playing up in the Bronx, and we had to play 4 sets. And we came up with this idea on the Saturday night before it when we were drinking. And so we laid down a couple of ground rules that we were going to do original music pretty quickly, do all original music, but we had 4 one-hour sets to do every night. So I was writing like a demon for the first 6 months or a year. And then we started to get reviews. And the first thing the reviewers were saying, these songs all have a narrative. They have characters in them. And I was saying, really? I didn't even notice. But what had happened in the 4 years from being the new wave band into becoming a playwright and then going into Black 47, I had changed my style totally without even thinking. So I was writing songs that I suppose were kind of mini plays or little novellas. And I kept that in in the playwriting and in the novel writing, then I just used the three different formats, the playwriting, novel writing, and songwriting. And I began to see the difference between them. And it all comes from the same idea. If you get an idea, I have to think, is that a song, or is it a play, or is it a novel? And I use the three, but I had to learn how to do the three of them. And the novel writing was the hardest one for me to do. I began to think, why am I doing this? This is torture. Yeah. And on top of everything else, you have editors who can pronounce on you. And in rock and roll, you didn't have that. In music, it was like, you are the writer, and that's it. And it was the same thing then going into playwriting. The playwright normally doesn't direct, whereas when you're on stage with a band, and you're the leader, you are directing. Everything is staged, you know. You might even think it's staged, you know, even down to taking dance lessons. How do you move across the stage? It's not that you do it in a particular way. It's just you do it in a way that the audience follows what you're doing, you know? And people always say, what's your favorite place to play? I never had one. It was, as long as the crowd there, I didn't give a goddamn. It was like, meant I was going to get paid, and I didn't have to deal with the owner when I'm getting paid at the end of the night. And but there's a big difference. If you're on a big stage with a lot of people out there, you're trying to make the whole thing big so that you're stretching out to the back rows. When you're in a small punky place, then it's you and the audience, and you're kind of in the thick of them, and you're directing that body sway of the whole audience. With the big place, you can't do that. So you have to modify your way of dealing with things. And I think that's kind of an answer.
Yes, no, thank you. It's very interesting. There's a question here from Carmel asking if you could tackle a new art form, something else, in addition to all the many art forms you do, what would it be?
I never wanted to be an actor. And I deal a lot with actors, and I have great empathy and sympathy with them. But I came from an improv background too. You see, to me, there's rock music and there's rock and roll. And rock music to me is kind of like Pink Floyd, who I love, but everything is worked out. And I was in bands like that, but it wasn't for me. I was a rock and roller right from the start. It was like that. And with rock and roll, what you're doing is you're waiting for that moment when everything explodes and you're taken into a different sphere. And usually you can take the audience with you. And that's why I would be waiting for it with Black 47 every night. Not waiting for it, but I know it's going to come sooner or later. And I always remember going to see the Dead one night, the Grateful Dead. And you wouldn't think of the Dead as being rockers, but they are, of course. But I remember they were playing for about 2 hours or something like that. And they played Sugar Magnolia. And something happened at that moment. And I felt it too. And the whole place became a Dead concert at that moment. Up until then, it wasn't. And I realized, yeah, that's, later on, I realized that's what we were doing with Black 47. And then, you know, I knew Strummer pretty well, Joe Strummer, and he didn't talk about the Clash very much, but he was very aware of that too. And he was a big advisor to Black 47. He loved the band and loved that we were mixing all these different influences. So I don't know. I'm not sure I could rise to another form. I suppose the fourth thing I do is I do musicals, and where you're combining a book and music at the same time. So I've kind of learned how to do that, but I wouldn't do poetry because I don't think the world needs another mediocre poet. And anyway, when I do poetry, the few times I do it, I feel like I can hear the music behind it. You know? So I've been very influenced by Yeats. Yeats fancied himself as a songwriter, but he is incredibly hard to put his music into songs. Mike Scott of the Waterboys did it. I've done it a couple of times with his poems, but I learned a lot from Yeats. There's something that he does, and I learned a lot from Cavafy, the poet of Alexandria, that I use in Rockaway Blue too. Yeah, poetry, maybe I try it, but I doubt it. No. I'll spare you all.
So we are sadly almost out of time, but we have one last really lovely comment and question from Brian. He says he really enjoyed the book. I'm a college history professor, and every year my students are younger and have less of a memory of 9/11. And now the 18-year-olds who were born after 9/11, and of course, don't remember it at all. One of the things I really felt in Rockaway Blue was grief, and how grief rippled through this family and community. And I really appreciate the novel as a document of that grief as we become further and further removed from the event. Can you speak about how you captured that grief and its ripples and got it into the characters?
Yeah, well, I lost two really good friends during it, and I find I'm missing them more as I got older. That there was an opportunity for us to go on, you know, and one was Michael Judge, and the other was Richie, an NYFT guy, and Richie Muldowney, and I miss them, and I think that's part of it. But also, there was a huge amount of Black 47 fans who died during it, and for the first year or two afterwards, as we were touring, people would come up and they would bring the pictures, and they would say, "You have to do this song. This was Johnny's favorite song." They'd show you the picture. And sometimes you knew them, you vaguely recognized them. And then it was worse when you didn't. And you realize that there were people out there that you had this big influence on that you had no idea who they were. And it was just something overpowering about that. And now they're gone and you don't have a chance to see them again. So I think also that there are so many people in New York still who lost someone really close to them at that point. And occasionally I run into someone like that and we talk, and it's harrowing that they'll never get over it. That's the thing, you know. It's so I guess I tuned into that both in my own loss and in the loss that I see around me. And but it was Brian who brought that up. Yeah, I know what you're saying, because sometimes I talk about 9/11, I don't really talk about that much. It's just down the street from me. And even sometimes still when I pass by the Liberty Tower, I don't want to look at it. You know, it's just too close. But I see what you're saying when you're talking to students now who don't get it, you know, and there's something to me that's really mystical about it. But then it's the same thing with Vietnam and with Iraq. I've spent a lot of time working on a musical about Iraq. In fact, I was working on it this morning. And I guess that Iraq hasn't been covered yet in a way that gets to the heart of it. I mean, many of the guys who went over there have written great books about it. But there's something about catching something on stage and catching it with music that you get to the core in a way that you don't get in a novel, you know. So yeah, I get the grief, and I guess I hope that this book in some way brings people closer to the great people that died, but also to the time before it. You know, it was a time of opportunity. I call those people the Clinton children. Everybody was looking out at it. Everyone was optimistic about America at that point. And I don't think we have been optimistic about America since then. And I think it's important to get back to that. So hopefully this book will, in some small way, bring people together and get them back into it. And thanks for saying that, Brian. It's touching what you said.
Well, thank you, Larry. That was a great answer and a great thought, and sadly a great way to end things. We are out of time. This has been truly lovely. Larry and Matt, I really appreciate your time and your thoughtful conversation. Audience, I appreciate your presence here with us tonight. If you haven't done so already, you can order Rockaway Blue at northshire.com or buy it in either Northshire bookstore location in Portugal, New York, or Manchester Center, Vermont, sorry. And you can pre-order Matt Fitzpatrick's next book, Demon Tide, which will be coming out in early September.
Yes.
So you can order any of those. Thank you everyone so much, and have a wonderful rest of your evening.
And thank you.
Rachel.
Thank you for listening.
Thanks. Good night, everybody.
Good night.